That's 622-4141 extension 4. Just looking at a couple of the comments here. One person expressing concern that SORT, which could have been a major assistance at this point in time, no longer exists. Another person talking about the issue of other kinds of crime that could really be major threats to national security, not just the violent crime, but also white collar crime. That in the midst of all of this, let's not lose sight of the white collar criminals who can destabilize the country as well.
We have Marval just before we have Marval and then Marval. Thank you for holding. Go ahead, please.
Good morning to everyone in the house.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I am sure a lot of people like myself condemn this assassination plot in the strongest possible way. As far as I see it, the perpetrators are cutting off their nose to spite their face, because this just makes a very good excuse for the SOE to continue if the country is more under threat from the criminal elements. That is how I see it.
Thank you.
So
Which
much.
is something we discussed earlier on. This latest threat, which seems very, very serious, if the Prime Minister's life has been threatened and also 3 other high-ranking cabinet officials, about 8 days before a decision is to be made on whether the SOE is to be continued or discontinued, will have some bearing on the National Security Council's decision.
I would say, again, we have to look at the context within which the SOE was called. This is a completely separate context. This is a threat on the life of the head of state. If anything that should change is the mechanisms, either create or change the mechanisms, upgrade the mechanisms of protection for the executive branch. That's the one thing I take away from this. Okay, if this thing is now real, let's go in and talk to the Secret Service, talk to the Federal Bureau of Investigations, talk to diplomatic security for the State Department in the U.S., or even Special Branch in the U.K., and say, how can we change what we're doing in terms of our protection and investigations of threats and assassination plots so we can meet this more definitively, more strategically, without it becoming a national crisis every time something happens. Because let's say somebody makes a threat or a viable threat every day of the year, then are we going to be in crisis for the rest of our time here? No, we can't function that way, because you know what that's going to affect? This also is going to affect the international perception of Trinidad and Tobago. Because again, remember, we talked about this: military, economic, political, social, environmental factors within national security. If we don't get a handle on this and upgrade the mechanisms of protection for the executive branch, then what we're saying to the world is we can't handle our own internal business. What that says to foreign investment: why should I put my money there if these people can't handle their own business?
Does it say that we're not handling our own business?
It's a response. But what I'm saying is, if we don't change and upgrade and develop a mechanism after the fact, then what it's sending a clear message to the international community. We don't want that. I would suggest to this government that, hey, from this point, this is where you start sitting down with the heads of your security services and units and saying, how can we make this system better? How can we make the investigative process better? How can we make the rapport and the communication links with the media better, so it's not this emotional national crisis response? Because when you look at this in terms of the mathematics of the thing, this is not a national crisis. This is the threat on the heads of government.
Which doesn't diminish the threat, but it's not the same thing.
It's not the same context, because remember, you're looking at these things. In Harvard history professor Charles Mayer, definition in 1990, national security is defined through the lens of national power. National security is best described as a capacity to control those foreign and domestic conditions that the public opinion of a given community believes necessary to enjoy its own self-determination, autonomy, prosperity, and well-being.
We got Southeast Port has been holding. Thank you so much for holding. Go ahead with your question or comment, please.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, to me it looked like it's a shamness, because you don't get that kind of information in national security and then relate it onto the public. You do what you're supposed to do, you do what you have to do, and then you come on out with it. But then again, it says like just a few days then before the SOE get eliminated, is like what? Is an excuse then to bring it back on and to bring on more rigorous operations towards citizens of the country for no reason. But then again, we just cannot say that that is a sham. We have to look at it very seriously. But national security don't have to come out and let the public know what's going on just like that. I think there's something far different to what they're saying.
All right, thank you very much. Another question that comes to mind is, this is day 95 of the state of emergency. 95 days, a pretty long time, almost 100 days. That's a little under, about 3 months. And the forces, in some people's estimations, have been draconian. People have made sacrifices for the diminished the individual rights with a bid to the authorities saying we're using this to get a hold on the crime. Is this an indication now, when we see this red alert threat and the threat to the Prime Minister and 3 senior cabinet members, as an indication, an indictment on the effectiveness of this 95-day SOE?
I wouldn't say it's really an indictment. What I would say is we are in danger of creating an insurgency in this country. Because if you look at history, if you look at other nations, how the government handles those fringe, marginalized elements, they can either create allies or they can create enemies. I'm not saying this government has done that. What I'm saying is that there's a danger that we ourselves are creating conditions for an insurgency that we have never had before. Even in light of the 1970 coup, the 1990 coup, and other things that have occurred, we are in danger, extreme danger of creating a monster by our own hands.
How so?
Because how you treat with those elements, how you treat with those people, I'm not saying be nice to them. I'm not saying pat them on the back and be cool. I'm saying, you know what, if you're going to deal with them strictly within the bounds of the law, not based on discretion, not based on how you feel. You have to follow the letter of the law. Because if it comes back to where it's your policy and not the policy of the law and what the laws of the land say, then it becomes
that the government has gone outside the bounds of the law?
Well, we don't know that. I'm not in those meetings. I don't know what laws they're reading and what lines are saying, okay, I can arrest this guy based on this. No, we have to be very careful. When you're conducting operations against criminal elements, you can move a criminal from being a criminal to being an insurgent or being a rebel faction. That's what happened a lot in Central and South America during the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. That's what's happened in Africa with the decolonization of, there's this whole thing that we created, and now you get one government goes in there in Africa, and then they just beat the crap out of everybody, and they create a rebel force. The rebel force comes in, then they do it, so you create this cycle. What we had in 90 and 70 were within different contexts, but what we're talking about is we have to be very careful with the use of the law and implementation of the law, because there's a danger we could create an insurgency. It's happened in the U.S. I mean, the U.S. has made as many allies as they've made enemies, because at the end of the day, you have the whole infidel thing going on with the Arab nations. I'm not saying the U.S. is always right in what they do, but there's things they have done that has created monsters that have come back to bite them.
We've got on the line former